So the hourglass has been turned. Let's get it on.
Get it on. So today we are talking about personal narratives and letting go of personal narratives, how they affect us and our growth process. And also at some point, I'd like to maybe go a bit even deeper than usual and talk about what the function of memory really is, because that's where we store all this information, right?
Correct.
So yeah. So letting go is, well, that's basically the subject of today, letting go of narratives, personal narratives. So, and it comes from, well, this is something that's common with each and between each and every, or it's common with each and every client. So there's not one client that can be singled out that doesn't have a personal narrative going on to which there's some kind of victimhood.
I agree with you. And every person who has a dad story, just right there, just the dad story. We don't even have to go into the mother thing. Just the dad story itself is the explanation that guys will give for why they made the choices that they did that got them where they are. Why somebody is or isn't an athlete. Why somebody did or didn't go to college. Why somebody did or didn't have success with women.
Mm-hmm.
All of these personal stories, this is our local rationalization of why we are where we are. Now, the guys who end up coming to a coach mentor are guys who finally start wondering if they do understand where they are. That's a critical little moment in the piece here. They don't know where they are. Dante's Inferno, and midway in the journey of my life, I became lost, right? 7 concentric circles of hell, right? These ideas that we have about who we are, what we are, why we are, color our idea of where we are. And it's only in hindsight that we recognize that we may have become lost. But in the moment, we understand something is wrong. There's this internal alarm going off, and things are starting to break down. Things are shutting down. You're not getting out of bed. You're not staying on top of your hygiene. Everything you see in your world is looking problematic, and you're thinking, why do I have this terrible luck? This isn't fair. Why do other guys get breaks and I don't? Or whatever. Mm-hmm. You're seeing all of this stuff. You're cobbling it together into a story. The story that you're telling yourself is your why. This is why I'm here. And in reality, here is a slippery concept, and you don't know what being truly here means. You don't know what being here means because you have a complicated relationship with time. And we can't talk about memory without talking about time. And we also can't talk about memory unless we talk about whose memory.
Yeah, and here we go. There's the deep dive right there.
Right?
Yeah.
As far as getting to the creative part of the mind goes, it's not just going over here in idea land, it's also going over here in how do we fuse these things. And that's called polymathic thinking. It's also called Renaissance thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Our Renaissance culturally, I'm Italian, right? Our Renaissance culturally from, you know, high, low Gothic to high Gothic art to, the Renaissance, which was for its time a virtual experience with perspective and just, this intense realism that felt three-dimensional. That Renaissance, that's what we're talking about. Polymathic thinking, Renaissance thinking, is what we're talking about when we fuse the right brain people and the left brain people together in a synthetic, in a synthesized way. And that's the way our brain should work as well. There's this thing in the middle of your brain called your corpus callosum, right? You want to have balance across those hemispheres. You also want to have balance between the front and the back. In the back of your brain, you have this reptilian hindbrain that's been here for a minute. It's been here since the very beginning, and it's got this big blown out meat body so that it can rise up out of the sea and walk around on the land and build itself an internet. And then go into little rooms and stay in there. But here we are. You've got this hind brain. And we all know that there are this idea of chakras. We know that's a thing. We know that we actually generate electricity. We know that we have a magnetic field. This is not crazy talk. This is freaking science.
Mm-hmm.
And so here we are, these creative energies and these left brain energies with both this deep, deep, grounded, rooted lizard brain, snake brain, alligator brain, what have you. We also have this primate forebrain, this gray matter, that's constantly reasoning and thinking in terms of if, then, left, right, constantly looking for local meaning. This is, alas, Horatio, I knew him well. The human looking at his own skull, humanity looking at itself in the mirror, a chimp going, ooh, ooh, with self-recognition.
Mm-hmm.
And when you put these two things together and these other two things together, we discover through meditation that we're able to balance our consciousness at a pretty much singular point, kind of like holding a ball on a frisbee and trying to keep it in the center. We discover that if we can do that for long enough, if that foundation is stabilized, then something else happens, which is that there's this energy that we naturally conduct, literally conduct, and we're able to feel and see balance in such a completely visceral and intellectual way that what's happening is we're accessing our memory. And I'm going right into the function of memory with this.
Mm-hmm.
Our memory is in truth our true memory is infinite. It's instant. It has a different, if you've experienced it, you understand that it's timeless. If you've experienced it, you understand that it's not only part of your identity, it's your entire identity. And this, sort of Game of Thrones, mask from the Hall of Faces or whatever that we put on, that's our personal story. And we can get as deep into that character as we want to make this experience, this virtual reality, this second renaissance that we're going through. You know, when I was 18, it was 1986. I mean, I had a Commodore 64 with 64 freaking K for memory. Speaking of memory, right?
I had that too.
The Commodore 64, right? And I remember saying at 16 years old, I was an interesting kid. I remember with a story. Um, I remember saying, I remember saying the Renaissance will be virtual. That's lower Dennis, the ego guy. And I'm not saying ego in a bad way, but that's the guy who has a personal story saying, I remember saying, blah, 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 blah. Look how everything's related. Renaissance, Renaissance, Renaissance. Look, I can do this all day. Look at how I can associate everything to everything. Look at how I can connect all these dots. What happens when you disconnect the dots? When you disconnect the dots, you remove the part of the story that has anything to do with supporting your physical existence, or even better than that, the idea of your identity as something that is physicalized. Mm-hmm. Because there's nothing wrong with physicality as a concept. It's an interesting little, cosmic terrarium we've put together here. Why bail on it? Mm-hmm. But in the dream of life, the function of memory is either through personal narrative to support the fiction of the local identity, we're calling the ego, and the construct that it takes to support that, like a matrix of sorts, Maya, the world of illusion. I mean, you can go into any freaking, culture and find out the Aboriginals consider life, the dreaming is what they basically call it. There's, all of these religions, Christianity, for God's sake, is saying, don't believe your lying eyes. The meek are going to inherit the earth. I want you here in heaven. Mm-hmm. Wherever heaven is, whichever direction that is. Well, the direction is in, as we know. And when you go in, you are in a moment which is the perpetual, infinite access to all possibilities simultaneously. That is infinite memory. That's really impossible to communicate in words to someone who hasn't had that experience. It doesn't mean anything. It's like a word in a foreign language. There's no substance. You're giving me a check, but there's no gold in the bank to back it up. So memory is either used properly by being accessed, or memory is used improperly, and so the ego creates something it calls memory, when in reality what it does is it distracts you from presence, which is appropriate because it's your truest identity. And when you begin to access it through meditation, as crazy as all this crazy talk sounds, when you begin to access it, the story of your dumb little earth life doesn't, oh my God, it went away. It actually, your stupid dream gets better because you're not constantly attacking it and hacking at it with your attachment to a story about how you're broken. Mm-hmm. And so to come full circle, just to show you I'm actually paying attention, to the idea of letting go, the only thing you're letting go of is a choice. And it's the choice to be anything other than present. rather than, oh, let's talk about blah, blah, blah. Well, Socrates said, and Aristotle said, and Plato said, well, in Greek it says this, and now let's argue about the Hebrew version versus the, now let's get into religious. Instead of all of that, make the decision to focus on what is peace and what is presence.
Mhm.
The true idea of prayer isn't just stillness, it's letting go. Because you can be still, but stubborn like a mule. That's not meditation. Meditation isn't just stillness, it's letting go. And I have some stubborn clients because they are attached to their egos and they are attached to their personal narratives and they argue for their limitations. And when you argue for your limitations, then of course the world that you see, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I just created a model in which I showed local memory, which is actually the ego's story, and
Mm-hmm.
infinite memory, which is the only alternative there is.
Mm-hmm.
When you ask a question about the ego using memory, that becomes complicated for me because the ego's not using memory, the ego's creating a false version
Yeah.
of there's
But
no
are
go ahead.
but are they not the same storage space?
You're thinking in terms of space and time. That's your architect brain.
Mm-hmm.
It
Well, so where I'm coming from is, to me, everything that's stored in a human being, which can be
a human being.
accessed and recalled, it's in the cells. It's everywhere. Memory is not just up here, right? It's in the body too. It's.
Right. And so I've always kind of said, you've heard me say this over and over, that like, this existence is a Mandelbrot set. I mean, it just kind of continues to express itself
Mm-hmm.
as a microcosm and as a macrocosm, but it does that within a framework. And the framework is the lens that the ego sees through. And the
Mm-hmm.
lens that the ego sees through is cracked. It's shattered. And so it sees multiplicity, which is why it turns life into a Mandelbrot set, just a series of infinite fractals that adhere to a pattern because you're still seeing something through this cracked lens, and something is perfection. But it's
Mm-hmm.
perfection misinterpreted. And when you accept the idea that you are one of these ISPs, one of these nodes, one of these points within this system with a certain identifying set of characteristics, because everything is different when you go in far enough,
Mm-hmm.
then you're like Tron, you end up in the freaking game, you know? So again, I keep saying this matrix thing. So if we're going to sit here and talk about getting out of the matrix without intellectually jacking off, then, and keep it real because it's man up life coaching, then the truth is the ego tells a fiction based on an error. And the error is its concept of separate but autonomous parts, independently fueled by some mysterious internal energy source. And our science is complicated because it has to somehow explain that insanity.
Mm-hmm.
right? We have to explain infinite numbers. We have to explain particles moving backward through time and space. It gets pretty creative down there in the depths of quantum mechanics. And we wouldn't have to do that if we didn't create objects out of ideas and then attempt to apply this zero sum kind of thinking to something that is actually an architectural impossibility.
It's so tricky playing the game in the dimension we're in,
right?
And at the same time knowing that this is not really what's real. It's because you're so invested in this, what's happening right now, right? But something else to be true, but at the same time there's this little back and forth going on.
You know what it feels like? It feels like when you keep magnets as close together as you can without kind of letting them touch, and they pop together, and then you have to pull them apart.
Yeah.
There's this, or like a snap to grid or something on your computer, where if you get close enough, it just pops to it. There's this. That's why it's called temptation, right? There's this. It feels instinctual, but it's not instinct. It's programming. Like, meditation is instinct if you do it for long enough, but you've been so jacked up at this point that there's no way you're going to access this conversation in a way that's believing or trusting. If you're an intelligent person, I mean, if you're gullible, then you'll hail man up or whatever. But if you're intelligent, you're either going to say these guys are totally into themselves and full of shit and talking about some spiritual, hey, get a load of this. Have you heard this one? Man up. And then they sit around in a green room and they're talking about some sort of hippie bullshit. So you can do that. Or you can say, I'm smart and I'm vibing with these guys, and I'm at some level I'm deducing that they might just be onto something. And yeah, I have to think about broadcasting to a public audience and making sure they understand, this isn't just craziness, that there's really something here. But then again, you and I have this tendency to just go boom and go to the apex of this existence, which is where, rarefied spiritual air, where eagles dare. And we've been able to do that because we have let go of we are in the process of letting go of our personal narrative. And we understand that when we do this and others do this, that healing happens and reinstates a global, which is to say universal, which is to say cosmic, which is to say all-encompassing, infinite identity and self-awareness, but at the expense of a little tangential little dream that we were having that we became sort of gridlocked into, and our characters were afraid to let go of their scripts. That's what's happening here. I mean, that's this whole segment in a nutshell. That's really what's happening. The rest is details, right?
Yeah.
Good news is that your scary, scary dream isn't real. The bad news is you can't seem to wake up out of it. And that's sucky. And that's why guys say that they feel stuck. And that's why they end up coming to life coaching to begin with. And they come into our front door and learn the same thing they would learn if they went into Catholicism and mastered it, went into Islam and mastered it, went into any freaking religion and mastered it, because the bottom line with any religion is freaking prayer and praise. It's always the same crap. Prayer just means meditate. Be still, let go. And if you have to say some sort of a mantra or prayer, the Lord is Lord, 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 good, 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 Lord, good, Lord, yay, you're good, I'm not so great, blah, 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 or whatever the heck, your religion tells you to say, so that you can eventually get into this prayer state. The prayer state is not the words. The prayer state is the click, and it's not that you're conscious of it when it's happening. People, that's how the ego wants to perceive it. That you're like, oh, I'm getting my magic beast powers. It's that you're like the nine-tailed fox in Naruto Shippuden or something. All of your chakras in this outrageous place. Yes, I did just do that. But you've got all this power. That's the ego is such an energy tick. That's its total dream. Is that. No, that's not what meditation is. What meditation is for a long time, your ass must have been awake because you made dots. There's proof that you were here physically. There's proof. You didn't make lines. So there was some part of your brain that still understood that it had these basic fundamental, tasks that it had to perform. But we shifted, and we shifted out of life and into this. And just because your eyes haven't opened in that space yet doesn't mean that your effects aren't valuable. In fact, they're priceless. Does it sound a little wacky? Sure. Is it 100% true? That doesn't even make sense. 100%. 100% of what? It's absolutely true. What are we supposed to do? Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to let go of grievances. How do you let go of a grievance? A grievance is a verb. You grieve. What does grieve mean? It means it's a celebration of loss, of lack. You are seeing loss and seeing lack. You do not understand that the things that you see are results of your thoughts. You think that your thoughts are reactions to the things that you see. That's where you're incorrect. And the only way that you will believe me is if I provide some proof for you. And when I say, screw you guys, I'm going home, I do not want to be out here. I'm not the frickin' Messiah. I don't want to convince anybody. I would troll my own freaking thing if I heard something like this. I know how hard it is to hear this message. I totally get that. Doesn't mean it's not true. How do I prove it to you? I don't have to prove it to you. I have guys who pay me to prove it to them. But the truth here is true. That's why we re-identify with it. And there's a process for that re-identification, and it involves letting go of attack thoughts. And before you can let go of attack thoughts, you have to understand what are attack thoughts. To do that, you have to understand that thoughts are things. To do that challenges your perception of the world, which is why all of your religions require you to disbelieve your lying eyes and have faith. And all of these dreams will fall away, and you will have this revelation. And we will be raptured up into some sort of holistic synthesis. Duh, it's right there. Huh? Mm-hmm. That's what we're looking at.
Yeah, and that was not even the tip of the iceberg.